This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
There have already been a bunch of moves in the NFL during its legal tampering period, not even yet 24 hours old, and there is a lot to react to. Obviously, no Aaron Rodgers news definitively as of yet, and I realize that by recording this, I am guaranteeing something big goes down within the next half an hour or so while I'm talking. Can't react to it live here on the air. But what we're going to do today is go through the moves that have happened thus far and outline what they mean, what they don't mean, where teams stand, and based on my win totals in my model right now, we'll outline a couple of futures we're looking at here in the divisional market with no win totals up yet, but we'll talk about the impact of these moves and also talk about that Rodgers deal and say, okay, let's see what happens. How would I view the Jets and the Packers if that were to occur? We'll go through that hypothetically, just let you know what we're seeing things across the NFL as of right now. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com here, as mentioned, to break down what my numbers are saying about free agency thus far in the NFL, outlining win total moves, which teams have improved, which teams might be on the slide. We'll break it down, all that. And again, the Rodgers to the Jets, the potential for that, we'll talk about later on as well. If you're looking here for some NCAA tournament breakdowns, we did record our full bracket podcast with Dr. Ed Feng and Bennett Corcoran last night. That was a live stream on the FanDuel YouTube page that is now up on the Covering the Spread podcast feed as well. So if you want help breaking down your bracket, check out the insights from Ed and from Bennett, two very smart guys. Get their thoughts there on strategy and much more, their Final Four picks, championship picks to help you fill out your brackets. If you want some betting thoughts on Thursdays and Fridays games, both those breakdowns, individual shows coming up tomorrow here in the Covering the Spread podcast feed and on the FanDuel YouTube page. We'll get a breakdown of both those days, let you know spreads, totals, money lines, where you see value by talking to people who know college basketball well, aka not me, getting their insights there. Those will, again, both be up tomorrow. No show Thursday with the double episodes on Wednesday, and then back with more NFL free agency breakdowns coming on Friday with Ryan Williams in here, the same feed. So to get all those as they are posted, make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review as well. This March, take your first shot at college hoops with FanDuel Sportsbook and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 on the bracket and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to point spreads to that 5 versus 12 seed matchup you've been eyeing. All in an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. There is no better place to bet the tournament than FanDuel Sportsbook. Sign up today and make every moment more with FanDuel all tournament long. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. First online and real money wager only. $10 deposit required. Refund issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. FanDuel is offering online the sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with the Kansas Star Casino LLC. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG. In Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In Connecticut, 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Kansas and Wyoming, 1-800-522-4700 or in Kansas, ksgamblinghelp.com. Louisiana, 1-877-770-STOP. In Maryland, mdgamblinghelp.org. In New York, 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. And in West Virginia, go to 1-800-GAMBLER.net. Now let's start things off here by talking about that big hypothetical in the NFL, talking about Aaron Rodgers to the Jets. I am assuming this happens today. You know, typically Rodgers goes on the McAfee show on Tuesdays. I haven't seen that he's scheduled to go on today, but, you know, I could see him announcing it there. But also Trey Wingo of formerly of ESPN, he was the one who reported yesterday that the deal is done. Wingo has a good track record with Rodgers news. A lot don't. Schefter does. Wingo does. So I'm going to go ahead and put that trade in right now and outline what it would do in my numbers if I put Aaron Rodgers on the New York Jets. Without Rodgers, it's pretty grim for the Jets because, again, I'm going in assuming it's just Zach Wilson for this year. And Wilson, I would think, was better than perception, at least on early downs last year, but the late down efficiency was awful. So they would have the third lowest win total, assuming it's just Zach Wilson in there. I think that's probably too low based on how good their defense is, but defense can regress, stuff like that. With Rodgers on the roster, adding him to competent offensive line play and Garrett Wilson and stuff like that, I have the Jets at 9.9 wins. That would rank second in the AFC East behind just the Buffalo Bills. And honestly, it's not super far behind the Bills. Buffalo is better. They rank fourth in my power rankings, so they are a tier above the Jets, even with Rodgers. But the Jets are seventh with Rodgers in there. Both these teams have tough schedules. The Jets would rank with the 10th toughest schedule. The Bills would be seventh. Miami would be at 9.7 wins, so they're also right there. The eighth toughest schedule for them. So the top of the AFC East would be super bunched up. All three teams in this situation would be within, I've got the Bills at 10.3 wins, so they'd be within like 0.6 wins, which is pretty incredible. It would also give the Patriots the toughest schedule in football. So they just lost Jacoby Myers. They do have a competent OC this year in Bill O'Brien, so I have that in my model too, but it would hurt to face this kind of schedule. So if Rodgers goes to the Jets, they are at least in the discussion to win the AFC East, which I think is noteworthy for sure. They'd rank fourth among AFC teams for me in my power rankings behind the Chiefs, Bengals, and Bills, which may seem super high, but the Packers last year were still very efficient on early downs. It was just where the wheels came off in late downs. Not sure if it was the thumb injury for Rodgers, if it was, I don't know what it was, honestly. It was very odd, but they were very good on early downs still. So I think it's noteworthy that they still had that. And I don't think that Rodgers is washed by any means, especially once you give him a healthy thumb and stuff like that. I think you put Rodgers with Garrett Wilson, the rest of that offense, I think that could stabilize things. So yeah, I'd be high in the Jets, but I think that the process to getting there is pretty fair. So 9.9 wins for me for the Jets if they land Rodgers, despite a tough schedule. I think that is high, but I also think it's correct based on my process, based on stuff. You know, you could consider potentially the Jets to win the AFC East at plus 220, Dolphins plus 370, also kind of in that discussion with the defensive pieces they've added. But I think the bigger takeaway for me is I'm not betting the Bills despite their being plus 120 to win the AFC East as of right now. All three of those teams very much in the discussion. As for the Packers, they'd be down at 7.3 wins for me. They would rank 24th in my power rankings. Not the best situation around them, which is kind of why they struggled last year. I do like Christian Watson. We don't know a ton about Jordan Love, though. My prospect model, pretty low on Love coming out. So I think it would be fair to be low on the Packers if they didn't have Aaron Rodgers. They would not be at the bottom of the division, but they would be pretty close to it. So I think that the Packers would be pretty out of sight, out of mind if they were to trade Aaron Rodgers, if this were to happen. Let's talk about those Bears, though, because they've made a lot of moves in free agency, but also last week with that trade of the first overall pick. A lot of splashy moves, but the problem that I have in terms of modeling the Bears for my win total model is that my win total model revolves around passing efficiency and defensive passing efficiency. The problem is for the Bears that they've added a lot of guys who can help them a bit against the pass, but also primarily linebackers, guys who are going to help stopping the run, stuff like that. So the DJ Moore trade for the Bears was huge. It did elevate them in my win total model in a pretty significant way to add in a legitimate pass catcher to an offense that did not have that at all last year. That was a big move. And I do think stopping the run matters. I'm not trying to discount that. It just matters less than stopping the pass. So the gains there for the Bears in terms of what it does to their overall win total projection, not as big. And I think you could look at this two ways. You could say, okay, the Bears have gotten better. They definitely have. I agree with that. I think that the DJ Moore trade was phenomenal. I loved that. They're trying to make some small gains along the offensive line. I'm on board with that. But I think you could view it that one way. They have improved. Other way is I saw some people on Twitter asking if the Bears were now the best team in the NFC North. That's a straw person argument. It is not the most common refrain because you look at the betting markets and the Bears are not up there. So it is a straw man argument, and I very much recognize that, but it's out there. The Bears 3-1 to win the NFC North. I think that's too short. I think they should be longer than that based on the current team that they have in their hands. They're, again, still below the Packers to me, even if I assume the Packers are starting Jordan Love. So just don't, I think what I'm trying to say is ignore the straw people out there saying the Bears could be the best team in the NFC North. I still got them fourth. They're still not very high for me. Instead, I've got Detroit as a favorite in the NFC North pretty comfortably. Again, my model leans heavily on passing efficiency, and the Lions were pretty efficient through the air last year, and now they get to add Jameson Williams to replace DJ Chark. I assume that he is gone in free agency. I am worried. My model is too high on the Lions, both them and the Jaguars, potentially based on how good they were through the air last year, but I also think that these infrastructures are pretty good. Both these quarterbacks are solid. So there are two teams I don't mind buying into. Right now, the Lions plus 145 to win the NFC North. That's not terribly far off from being good value to me, I don't think. Now, I don't have like an actual like odds to win the division. I just have the win totals, but I don't think that's totally far off. So I'm excited to watch Justin Fields, excited to watch DJ Moore, excited to watch a lot of components of this new Bears team. I think it's just important to keep in mind that a lot of the big moves they've made have been at spots that don't impact passing or defensive passing efficiency, and you want to keep expectations in check. So yes, they've been solid moves for the most part, but they're not going to move them a ton of my win total model. And I think that we want to be most excited about the DJ Moore trade more so than the Tremaine Edmonds signing or anything else. The other big quarterback news of yesterday was Jimmy Garoppolo going to the Raiders. And now also today they signed Jacoby Myers on I believe a 3-year deal. And if you look at the baseline analysis of this move, it was largely that it was a lateral move for the Raiders to go from Derek Carr to Jimmy Garoppolo. They went from a non-needle moving quarterback who had proven he can be efficient in a decent offense, and I agree with that. That's the same thing. That's what Garoppolo is as well. So their projected efficiency for next year is about even with what it was last year. And I think that you consider the two moves. You get rid of Carr, get rid of that salary, and replace it with Garoppolo, who's in a similar tier at a lower salary. I think it's a very fair move. I don't think it's a bad move. The problem is that it's not going to move the needle. And again, in the AFC West, you kind of need some needle movers if you want to contend with the Chiefs. I've got the Raiders right now at 7.4 wins. I have the Broncos at 7.9, and I have Kansas City at 12.1. The Chargers to me actually closer to to Denver than they are to Kansas City. So I think it does help to have Garoppolo. If your goal is to be more efficient in 2023, your goal is to be more competitive in 2023, that's a good thing. You can definitely sell that as being a positive. I just don't think it makes them competitive in that division necessarily. So I would bet their win totals probably 7.5. I'm a hair below that. So I think they'll wind up being a stay away despite having Garoppolo, despite having Jacoby Myers, despite having Devontae Adams. I think it's a pretty neutral situation for me with the Raiders. A little bit higher on the Broncos. I do think I'm likely to be a bit above market on them for a couple reasons. The first one is that I respect Sean Payton a lot. I think he's a very good coach. I think coaching matters. And I think bringing him in does help the Broncos quite a bit. So that's one thing. The second thing is that the Broncos were kind of similar to the Packers last year, where they at times were decently efficient on early downs, but they could not convert to save their lives when it counted. They were terrible on third down, terrible in the red zone. So those are concerns. Those are spots where you need to convert, and they did not last year. But maybe bringing in Sean Payton helps them. Maybe bulking up the offensive line, which they had done, helps them. So I think we'll see a bounce back here. Now, this does not mean to bet them to win the AFC West. Not saying that. But they are plus 460 to win there. The Chargers plus 350. I think that what I want to do is, once we get kind of like exacta kind of markets up, like teams to finish exactly X position, like betting the Chiefs to win, Broncos second could be a route you could go in terms of looking at the AFC West. I think the Broncos are closer to the Chargers than perception right now, and that's a takeaway. Again, 7.9 wins for the Broncos for me is not high, but they're within striking distance of competency. And I think that that's better than what it was last year. So at least keeping a close eye on them. And I want to see once those markets do go up, what we can get for the Broncos, because I would be okay potentially buying into them there. Those are the teams that have made moves in terms of gaining guys. Let's talk about some teams that have, I think, slid back recently. Now, this is post Derek Carr. So we put Derek Carr in the Saints, and that's our baseline. I think they have declined since then. So the two teams I think are losing out right now are the Titans and the Saints. For both teams, primarily the losses are on defense. Last year, the Titans, I was lower on them than most on defense. Their personnel was not great. And as a result, they were awful on early downs against the pass, like truly hideous. If you sequester off early down passing efficiency, they were abominable. But they made up for it by stuffing the run, and they were very good on late downs. That's fine because it worked out. Their overall defense was okay. I just don't know how sustainable that is, especially now when they've got some key guys leaving there. So Tennessee, for me, currently at 7.9 wins in my model. The Jags are at 10.0, well in command of that division. I'm not betting the Jags at minus 145, but I think there is a considerable gap between the Jags and the rest based on the efficiency from Trevor Lawrence last year, based on Calvin Ridley being there in the fold this year. So I think that the Titans are at risk of drifting close to the Colts and Texans, not a tier you want to be in, really. I think the Texans might be like fine this year. They just added Shaq Mason, which is nice. They're slowly inching up my win total model, but they're not at the Titans yet. But I think that gap is smaller than you might think between those two teams. It's still more than a win, but it's shortening for sure. So it is concerning to me see how many guys that the Titans have lost. That might be by design based on some of the moves they've made, but just noteworthy they have lost some pretty key players, and a lot of them in bunches. Same thing for the Saints. The concerns for me also on defense for them, they have lost a lot of important players in their front seven. Most of them are like actual like good players too, not just depth guys. So we can make jokes about the salary cap being fake, but if the salary cap were actually fake, the Saints probably wouldn't be forced to let these guys walk. I think that they are a fun team. I'm not going to clown them for what they've done. It's helped them be competitive. I think they were better than perception last year too. But this is the trade-off you make. They're going to be worse against the rush next year. They're going to be probably worse against the pass a bit too, based on some of the guys they've lost. So I still have the Saints as the top win total in the NFC South by a pretty wide margin, but the gap between them and the pack is shrinking. Now, the caveat here is the Saints are at 10.2 wins in my model. That's a very high number, aided by a very soft schedule. If you were to plug in like the Saints in terms of just my power ranking and like get out a projected win total, not accounting for schedule, they would be at 8.9 wins. Respectable, but not otherworldly. Once you put their schedule in, it goes all the way up to 10.2. So the schedule's doing them a lot of favors. If that schedule gets tougher, aka Atlanta makes moves, Carolina makes moves, Tampa Bay, maybe they add Baker Mayfield that make them tougher based on my model at least, that could start to slip. So I think that the Saints are still the best team in the NFC South. I think that they are on somewhat shaky ground though. The Falcons are 4-1 to win the NFC South. It seems like they're going to stand pat with Desmond Ridder. I liked Ridder a decent amount coming out, but it's also hard to be super, super high on a guy who fell to the third round. So I like him. I think that he showed some decent signs last year, but realistically, it's hard to get super, super high on a guy who was a third round pick and is in his second year. So the Falcons 4-1 to win the NFC South. I'm at least keeping tabs on that right now. They're on my radar, watching it closely. I'm not jumping there, but I think that the bigger takeaway for me is the Saints at plus 115, not quite enough there for me to pull the trigger on them. So I think the primary thing is, again, keeping an eye on what the Broncos odds to finish second in the AFC West wound up settling in at, maybe eyeing some non-Bills options in the AFC East. I think that's the primary thing for me. And then also maybe going with the Lions at plus 145 to win the NFC North. I think that all those are at least on the radar as of right now. As mentioned, we'll be back with you again on Friday talking some NFL free agency fallout. Ryan Williams be back with me for that show, talking about his big takeaways. We're going to talk about Ryan, talk to Ryan about his thoughts on the Bears. Get his takeaways from free agency. Maybe with the Rodgers move will be final by then. We'll talk about all that with Ryan on Friday. Before then, though, as mentioned, we're going to break down the Thursday and the Friday games in the NCAA tournament from betting perspective. Austin Cass and then Ben Stevens will be our two guests for tomorrow to break down their thoughts on the first couple of days of the tournament. To get those as they go live, make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review as well. And again, all these shows do go up on the FanDuel YouTube page as well. If you've got any questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with any bets you may have for tonight. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow to talk about the first 2 days of the tournament. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.